So welcome everybody. So I have a very keen interest, both professional and personal, in the net zero regulation and policy that's developing. So I'm delighted this morning to be able to welcome a fantastic panel of people here. I just wanted to briefly acknowledge that, of course, there are so many different sources of green energy that in an hour we can't possibly aim to cover all of them in full. So clearly we're going to primarily focus on the areas of green energy that our panelists have had the most involvement in or are keenly engaged in. So without further ado, I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves. So first, could I please ask the Right Honourable Kwasi Kwarteng, would you please introduce yourself? Thank you.
My name is Kwasi Kwarteng. I was elected as Member of Parliament for Spelthorne, which is in Surrey, in 2010. And in July last year, in 2019, I was very privileged to be appointed Minister of State in Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy in that department. And my responsibility is exactly what this panel and this meeting is about. My job description, if you like, is Minister of State for Business, Energy and Clean Growth. So the net zero agenda, clean growth, clean power, are very much at the centre of my portfolio, and I'm very pleased to be here this morning.
Thank you very much. We're also joined by Helen Boyle from Cadent Gas. Helen, can I please ask you to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning everybody. Really pleased to be here this morning. Yes, my name's Helen Boyle. I'm the Regional Development Manager for Cadent Gas. Cadent is the largest gas distribution network operator in the UK, and my role is looking at the transition away from natural gas to green gases and all the stakeholder engagement that goes around that. So really pleased to be here this morning.
Thank you, Helen. And now Richard Gwilliam from Drax, please.
Hi, Anita. Good morning, everybody. Hi, my name is Richard Gwilliam. I'm the Head of Cluster Development at Drax, which means that I'm responsible for Drax's involvement within the wider Humber industrial cluster and how we can try and decarbonise one of the largest industrial clusters that we have in the UK. I'm predominantly going to be speaking about the power station itself. Drax, as you may be aware, is the largest power station that we have in the UK. It's been very much the backbone of the transmission network since it was first commissioned in 1974. But it started off life as a coal-fired plant, but I'm going to be talking about our conversion from coal to operate on sustainable biomass and the work that we're doing beyond that, actually, because we're actively capturing carbon dioxide from our flue gas at the moment with an ambition to become a carbon negative power station, making a significant contribution, hopefully, to the UK's climate change mitigation.
Thank you very much, Richard. Steve Cox, Electricity Northwest.
Morning, everybody. I'm Steve Cox. I'm the Engineering and Technical Director for Electricity Northwest, which is one of the 6 network businesses that collect 26 million customers in the UK to the grid system. My interest today is in the portfolio of energy sources and how they will impact networks, how they will all operate together, and how gas and electricity sources will interplay in the future to ensure customers have the energy they need to power their lives. So really pleased to be here this morning.
Thank you, Steve. And Victoria, please.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Victoria Melton. I'm the Director of Corporate Affairs at Peel. We have a diverse low carbon energy portfolio operating of over 300 megawatts. Peel is a family investor in the UK energy and real estate sector, but we're heartlanded in the Northwest. And through our industrial cluster Protos, we're delivering low carbon energy at a lower cost. This is also part of one of the super places, which is Net Zero Northwest, working in conjunction with the Northwest Hydrogen Alliance. We're delighted with the green industrial strategy and the strides that the government's taking towards net zero. Very, very pleased to be joining colleagues today for the discussion on the green economy, kindly hosted by Squire Patterson Boggs.
Thank you very much, Victoria. So to begin, I'd like to ask the Minister, please, to give us a short update on the government policy,
Sure.
please. Thank you.
So, I mean, this is a very significant day, really, a significant time to be talking about this subject. It comes on the back of last week's announcement regarding the 10-point plan, which I think was extremely significant. I mean, this was the culmination of work that I've been doing, certainly for the last 18 months as the Energy Minister, but also it flows directly from the net zero legislation that we passed in the summer of 2019. And the net zero legislation, just to recap, as I'm sure many of you know, basically says, as enshrined in law, that we should have net zero carbon emissions as a country by 2050. And the 10-point plan really, I think, picked up on that and showed a very clear sense of direction. And I'll just pick up a few things from the 10-point plan. I mean, the one that got the most headlines, I think, was the EV legislation or the EV aspiration. But from my point of view, I think carbon capture, usage and storage, that was a great announcement saying that we should have 4 clusters by 2030. I think the hydrogen ambition, the 5 gigawatts of hydrogen capacity by 2030 was hugely significant. That was something which I had been pushing as the energy minister. And I think, you know, that's something which is extremely exciting. It's a whole new industry, essentially. And then there were other things that have happened in the last 2 weeks. We've got a first green sovereign bond that was announced by the Chancellor. I think there was a story in the weekend press about the National Investment Bank, which again will have be able to deploy lots of capital to the green revolution. I think there's been a huge aspiration in terms of jobs. It's not just about the fight against climate change. There is also a huge industrial regeneration piece to the strategy. So in terms of figures, we've got something like 460,000 jobs in the kind of green sector, green jobs, green collar jobs they've been described as. But in 2030, which is 10 years time, we want to see that figure go from 460,000 to 2 million. So that's a quadrupling of the number of green jobs. So it represents a huge economic, industrial opportunity for the United Kingdom, and one in which we're already world leaders. I mean, I just need to refer to offshore wind, where in the UK we've got something like 11 gigawatts of capacity, installed capacity, and that represents something like 35% of the global total of offshore wind capacity. So I think the Green Revolution, the Prime Minister's 10-point plan represent a real economic opportunity for the UK. And I would say that in terms of where we are, this is one of the most exciting periods in our economic history, or recent economic history. I think we're going to make huge strides in clean growth, in decarbonising our economy. And I think that represents huge economic potential. So the government is fully behind the Green Revolution, as was evidenced by the Prime Minister's 10-point plan, which I have to say was landed extremely well. I mean, that was way exceeded expectations. I mean, the only sort of fly in the ointment was the Daily Mail lambasting us for the EV rollout. But I think we can withstand that. And I think actually a majority of people are fully behind this.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting. And I think as you'll have probably guessed, most of our debate today is going to be around the issues coming out of the 10-point plan. But perhaps I could just start with a more general horizon-gazing question for our panelists. So what do you think the future of green energy looks like? You know, what do you think will be the most effective mix? And how can we leverage this opportunity to level up and have a real green industrial revolution? So perhaps I could go to Victoria first.
Thank you, Anita. Future of green energy, an effective mix, leverage, levelling up, and a green industrial revolution. Not easy questions to answer in a couple of minutes on today's panel, but I think we've got the right people here. As the Minister's directed, the Green Industrial Strategy has fired the starting gun on our journey to net zero. So if we're using current energy sources, then the base load provided by gas, by offshore wind, and by big nuclear means that the strides we can take towards SMRs, small modular reactors, towards increasing the gigawatt output of these large offshore wind with green electrification, and also through hydrogen from CCUS, from decarbonising methane. I think probably one of the key areas to look at is heavy industry and transport and heat. So the pointing towards heat pumps, retrofitting homes is going to be huge, and it's going to take time. With transport, looking ahead to the maritime industry, they're making great strides using ammonia as a hydrogen derivative for decarbonising the fuel needed to power out to, for example, maintenance on the offshore wind turbines. This is Wavemaster project being brought forward by Bibby and Peel, and also from industrial clusters. We're going to need clean energy at scale, and these will come in the first instance from these industrial clusters brought forward by HyNet in the northwest, in Teesside, in the Humber, through the Acorn project in Scotland. The Climate Change Council predict that 2.5 trillion market share from hydrogen in fuel cells, and will bring forward employment for 30 million people by 2050. So we are right at the leading edge of making sure we're making this transition cleaner, greener and faster. But I think the key point here is it's got to be in a circular economy. It's got to be economically viable. Green hydrogen is making great progress. 100 megawatt electrolyzers are starting to come forward from plans, but we also need to consider some more innovative technologies. One of the areas here is plastics, so using a waste fuel, converting them into hydrogen. So you get rid of a waste stream and you create clean energy. And this can be done in conjunction with baseload generation. And also we need to consider the supply side. So how's our grid going to manage? I think probably at the moment, there's been a lot of work on generation, but actually how are we going to manage supply and demand? There's a huge opportunity to do private wire. There's a huge opportunity in decentralization with battery storage. So using some of our renewable technologies to generate clean energy that can then be converted into hydrogen to make sure that we are including all market technologies to deliver as soon as possible towards net zero in time for 2050.
Thank you, Victoria. We're going to ask our other panelists to comment. Richard, perhaps you'd like to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, Victoria covered an awful lot of ground there. There is, clearly the need for diversity in how we look forward and look at future energy mixes. But I think, looking back over the last couple of years, we've seen a fantastic transition in this country, which we hope will continue. The penetration of offshore wind has had a hugely significant effect on how the energy systems run in the country and where we get our power from. And likewise, solar. It's only in 2018, actually, there's more solar installed in the country than coal. I mean, that's a tremendous statistic for change, I think. Absolutely fantastic. But there's also a sort of a complexity around what happens on sort of days like today. So I'm sure, like you all this morning, to get the kids to school, I had to scrape the cars because there was no wind. It was a bright morning, but it was very chilly. And if you look at the energy mix, it was dominated by gas. Wind wasn't doing what you would hope it would do, and solar wasn't quite on the bars yet. So we need a system that is still flexible, has a number of generation types and supports, and means that we can have the sort of dependency that we've had in the system in sort of many years. And I said at the top of the call, Drax's primary interest is in biomass generation. The power station itself can produce power for about 4 million homes, but actually biomass alone probably isn't enough, and the work that we're doing at the power station is looking at how we attach carbon capture and storage technology to biomass, and that gives us something called BECCS, which is bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. So we're actually taking the flue gas, the carbon dioxide out of the flue gas, so that we're still providing green renewable energy, but also having a significant effect on the UK sort of climate change ambitions. So just building on the example of the plant itself, if we rolled out bioenergy with CCS across all 4 of the biomass generating units we have at the power station, we'd be taking 16 million tonnes of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere per year. You know, to put that into context, that's like equivalent of planting a forest the size of Wales. So, you know, not only with biomass, I guess we get flexibility. The system can ramp up and down as we need, as the demand requires, but you also get the environmental benefit that comes with it. So, you know, we need something to complement the large levels of wind and solar that we're getting on the system and make sure that we can keep balancing the system to cope with the demand.
Thanks, Richard. Helen, would you like to go next?
Hi, yeah, thanks very much. So I think first and foremost, it was the announcement last week of the 10-point plan, and the prominence that hydrogen played in that is just really hugely positive and sends a really strong signal to the market around investment and helping to get that going. I think what I would say is it's not a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to the solution and future of energy. It's very much dependent on area by area. And what we also find for Cadent and the areas that I look after in Cadent, which are the Northwest and the West Midlands, you find areas have set their own accelerated decarbonisation target, which has an effect on the possible solutions for the energy mix going forward in that particular area. What I would say as well is that I think there needs to be more of a whole systems planning approach. So not just kind of energy vectors and the associated companies working in isolation. There needs to be more planning across those energy vectors. A recent example of that is the work that Cadent Gas and Electricity Northwest collaborated on to build a pathway to net zero for Greater Manchester, but also for Lancashire and Cumbria. And the key thing for Greater Manchester is a couple of years ago it set itself a target of becoming carbon neutral by 2038 rather than the UK target of 2050. So it has a challenge when it's looking at the future of energy. So you've got the gas distribution network operator and the electricity distribution network operator coming together to work on that future energy pathway and the steps that need to be taken between now and 2038 to achieve that ambition. More of that kind of thing needs to happen to give all the stakeholders involved in this debate a clear view and signals of where you can make those no regrets investment decisions. Because what we've seen is quite a lot of paralysis over the last couple of years, where whether it's a local authority or whether it's large organisations that we've spoken to, haven't been clear what the future of energy is, and so therefore don't know how to decarbonise and don't know where to spend their money because they don't want to end up in a situation where they have stranded assets in a couple of years' time. So by coming together and doing that whole systems approach, clearer indication to the private sector on where it should spend its money, and the 10-point plan was a very welcome part of that last week.
Thanks, Helen. Steve, would you like to finish off? It's a nice lead in from Helen, I think.
Okay, thank you. I'll pick up on a few of the previous comments. I think Victoria is quite right in terms of diversity within the energy portfolio is important. The market competition in a level playing field in the markets to ensure that the lens through which we judge the appropriate mix of energy sources is the price that they're able to serve customers at. So no one technology has a right to be dominant. It's all about customers and prices and affordability. I think Richard's absolutely right in terms of flexibility is important in the energy sources. I think one point other speakers have not really picked up on, and it is referred to in the 10-point plan, and I particularly welcome the greener buildings element of it. Energy efficiency has a huge role to play in giving people warmer homes, saving people money and making the transition more affordable. It's probably been the most successful change agent for energy and carbon reductions over the past 10 to 15 years. And as the Green Point plan says, there's another 16% can be saved through energy efficiency measures. So that's, I think, hugely important, together with blending the other technologies on an affordability basis to ensure security of supplies for customers. People, customers really value the greening debate and agenda, and it's something certainly our customers are really bought into. But they do value above anything security of supply to power their home, so we must never lose sight of that in our choices around the mix.
Thanks, Steve. That was great. So to build on what you've already said, I'd like to sort of dive into a bit more of the 10-point plan. So could I ask your views on what you think are the most important aspects of the 10-point plan? And if I could come to you first, Richard, please. Perhaps I anticipate you're probably going to talk to us about carbon capture and storage. But...
Yeah. Apologies, Anita. I can't help myself, really, can't I? But yeah, look, I mean, we absolutely welcome the breadth and the ambition of the plan, actually, and it has been great to see so much positive coverage around it, coverage behind it for the government, because we think it's bold and ambitious and something that we absolutely support. Yeah, I mean, clearly the CCS component is a significant part of it for Drax, but particularly through the industrial decarbonisation opportunities and the opportunity to focus on clusters. So I mentioned briefly in the introduction that my job and role at Drax is to manage our interface within the cluster that we have in the Humber. So the Humber industrial cluster is by carbon dioxide emissions, it's the largest industrial cluster, second largest in Western Europe, biggest in the UK by a sort of considerable margin, really. It's a great place to start with the sorts of ambitions that the 10-point plan sets out. Tackling the CO2 footprint in the Humber gives us the scope to take 15% of the UK's emissions out of the mix, actually. So it's sort of hugely sizable sort of bang for your buck opportunity. So it's been hard actually to get us to this place, because the Humber's really big and often sort of viewed as sort of almost too big to try and tackle. But Drax is working in consortium with 12 other major energy companies and regional businesses on what deploying low carbon technology can do to help in the Humber. So it's not just Drax. We're working with British Steel on how they can decarbonise their plant at Scunthorpe. We're working with Equinor, who are looking to put hydrogen reformation facilities at the Saltend Chemicals Park in Hull. Working with National Grid, who are experts in transmission of gases. They will be doing the same for the carbon dioxide. And by doing that, and by sort of putting decarbonisation technologies in one place, we can have huge economies of scale in the Humber. Now clearly, there's a real northwest slant to the call that we have on the radar today. So I wouldn't want to start a battle over the Pennines, because there's great opportunities in HyNet through the work that Cadent are doing around hydrogen. There's also schemes and opportunities, as you'll be aware, as Victoria mentioned, up in Teesside and also across in Scotland. So I think collectively the sort of the big 5 clusters around the UK were welcoming with open arms the warm words around industrial decarbonisation. The fact that actually decarbonising industrial clusters not only has huge inroads in climate change targets, but can create jobs. Kwasi mentioned at the top that job creation is a significant part. There's 55,000 people employed up here in the Humber in terms of manufacturing. We can preserve those jobs. And we did an analysis that came out last week that said, around about 200,000 of Kwasi's 400,000 jobs can be created in the Humber. I think the work that we did said if we deployed bioenergy with CCS at Drax, we'd be able to generate 16,000 jobs during the peak of the construction. So these are, really big transformational opportunities. And I think it's really refreshing, actually, that we've turned the tide on environmental views. People aren't just seeing environment as something that we must tackle. It's something that can be used as a stimulus and to rebuild the economy post-COVID.
Thank you, Richard. Victoria, perhaps you'd like to add some further comments on that one.
Following on from what Richard's said, I think probably the most important thing that's come out of this Green Industrial Strategy and the 10-point plan is how holistic it is and how it does a whole cradle to grave coverage, not just from generation right through to operation, bringing forward distribution, and then encompassing new technologies. But there's the huge focus on the economic side, which means that energy is not being considered just in isolation about how we need to make it cleaner and greener. It's being considered in conjunction with economic recovery, how to make Britain great and how to make it even greater than it is now, making sure that we are the destination for inward investment. So by making sure we've got innovative technologies, that we are right up to date with investment strategies, means that other countries and other businesses will want to come and bring their opportunities here. families will want to relocate here. They'll choose to come to the UK, which will in turn stimulate growth right across the UK. I think probably one area where there is still more work to be done is on the market and funding opportunities. And it would be remiss of me if I didn't ask the Minister about long-term funding opportunities and price signals. We can only get this inward investment clarity and encouragement if the government, which it has already indicated it's going to do, puts in long-term market support. It's done it before with solar, it's done it before with onshore and offshore wind, and with this fantastic opportunity in hydrogen, 30 million jobs by 2050 across the globe, $11 trillion worth of infrastructure investment. This is an opportunity we need to grab, and delighted that this is the starting block for it.
Thank you, Victoria. Minister, would you like to comment further on that one?
I think Victoria makes a fair point that, you know, government has supported, has encouraged investment in renewables. There's no question about that. I mean, through the CFD round, the auction round, offshore wind has really taken off. And in a way that nobody anticipated. I mean, the way that the prices have fallen, something like 2/3, or, you know, from about £120 per megawatt hour to £40 per megawatt hour. I mean, that's hugely significant. And I think she's quite right, Victoria, when she says that hydrogen represents a potentially vast opportunity. And that's exactly something that we want to be looking to encourage in the months and weeks ahead. I mean, we have a hydrogen strategy for Q1 next year, which should be out before the end of March. And that, I hope, will set out some of the issues that we confront and will show a way in which we can stimulate hydrogen production. And that won't happen on its own. I mean, we've got to get involved with that. Now, whether it's an auction process or a return on equity, return on asset model, it remains to be seen. But we're definitely interested and definitely focused on trying to kickstart this industry.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And staying on the theme of hydrogen, perhaps I could turn to Helen and Steve. Perhaps Helen first. You know, the 10-point plan clearly shows that hydrogen is going to play an essential role in the net zero 2050 agenda. Could you perhaps give us your perspectives on the contribution of hydrogen, but also what investment, what adaptations are going to be required for that to be brought forward?
Yeah, sure. And you know, I would really support everything that we said so far, really, about the hydrogen and the growth and the ambition to grow the economy in that area. I'm very positive that the prominence that it played on the 10-point plan last week. I think an area where we could grow is our ambition, our production ambition. We've currently got in the 10-point plan 5 gigawatt hours by capacity by 2030, which is a relatively small amount, particularly when you consider what's kind of happening in Europe. So given our ambition around wanting to be really at the forefront of green energy production for the whole of the world, I think we need to make sure that our ambitions match that area, but it is hugely positive. I think what we've also got to consider is the other end of the scale. So we're talking so far about production and distribution through pipelines, and obviously Cadent is very involved in looking at blending hydrogen into the current gas main and the HyDeploy project that happened at Kiel, and now looking at HyDeploy 2. And Richard quite rightly talked about HyNet in the northwest, which has the I think it's the only project out there at the minute that has a pipeline associated to it, which will eventually blend into the gas mains for Liverpool and Greater Manchester as well. But we've also got the other end of the scale, and Steve touched on it earlier, when we're talking about customers and consumers. I think particularly when we're looking at the really thorny issue of how to decarbonise heat. which we think that really hydrogen will eventually and can really start to play a significant role in when it's at a large production scale. But what you've also got to be doing is investing in the end technology that's going to be sitting in people's homes. So, you know, people need to be comfortable with a new energy vector. They want to understand what a hydrogen boiler is going to look like, what their hydrogen hob might look like, these products that are going to sit in people's homes. At the minute, people have no idea what they're going to look like. So we need to be really bringing that kind of end technology in conjunction with stimulating the market as well. Is what is that going to look like in people's homes? How are we going to get them comfortable with it? Because that's change that takes quite a long time, and we're going to rely on consumers making that choice. I think what I would also say about it is, how are we planning for the governance around hydrogen and the market there? What do we need to put in place around the regulation and the governance structure of this brand new energy vector? And I would encourage that kind of conversation in that area too, to make sure that we've got the right framework in place to bring it to all the areas that really need decarbonising that hydrogen can help with.
Thanks, Helen. Steve, would you like to comment further on hydrogen?
Yeah, but surprisingly for a guy in the electricity world, hydrogen is actually quite important to us. I think it's really important in any energy debate to have a balanced approach. There isn't a winning technology that will solve all our problems. Do I think that's hydrogen? No. Do I think hydrogen has a very significant role to play? Absolutely, yes. Both in residential heat applications and particularly high temperature applications for industry that, you know, is so vital to modern industries. So I guess our perspective on the contribution of hydrogen is, it's probably a debate where we need certainty of direction and consistency of policy. So I really do welcome the 10-point plan, in that it gives us that. It says hydrogen form a role. It doesn't have to say exactly what it will do, but it gives us a direction of travel which we must be consistent on. A lot of the technology suppliers I work with every day need that consistency of direction, and once we had that in the solar industry, you saw the huge explosion in solar development and the investment from institutional investors into both onshore and offshore wind. So I think that certainty around hydrogen is being part of the mix, rather than getting bogged down in a technical debate about is it the ultimate technology or not, is much more important to have consistency of direction of travel. So I would encourage the Minister and the government generally and policymakers to look at that consistency, to allow industry and infrastructure to invest.
Thanks very much, Steve. So now looking even further ahead and going forward over the next 12 months or so. So we're waiting. Also, we understand there will be a fuller energy white paper, and obviously we have COP26 on the horizon. So I'd like to ask what the energy industry expects from the white paper, and how all this will feed into COP26. Steve, I know you've just spoken, but I haven't started with you before, so perhaps you'd like to kick off on this one. Thank you.
Okay, well, wishes for the energy white paper. So we'll try. I think I go back to my last point. I think consistency of direction of travel is very, very useful to industry. When I talk to our shareholders, and they invest billions in infrastructure in the UK through various businesses, they want that political stability, they want direction of travel, they want a balanced approach to how the UK will decarbonise its economy. So that would be my underlying theme. I think I would also want the white paper to appropriately balance early stage changes. So energy efficiency, the adoption of electric vehicles, I think, was a hugely strong point, bringing forward the adoption date. And very much it's not just about the vehicle itself, it's almost involving everybody in society in making the changes by adopting new technologies in their lives. The point, Helen, about people only really embrace this and believe this when they can personally contribute. So I think those early stage adoptions that people can really contribute to are very important. People get bogged down, I think, with what is MPV positive, particularly in business, and they will only do things that save money. Sometimes you have to do the right thing not just the most economic thing. And I'd like to see that leadership flowing through in the so there will be my headline wishes.
Thanks very much, Steve. Victoria, perhaps you'd like to jump in.
Yeah, I'm 100% in agreement with Steve. I think we've had the right signals, but that clarity on policy direction and the consistency will mean that we can continue to offer projects that are investable, from the very small SMEs coming forward with innovative solutions like Powerhouse Energy, or right up to the big industrial clusters which involve huge partnerships. I mean, Net Zero Northwest, of which Protos is a part, incorporates Siemens, Tata, Store Energy, Innovin, SR, CF Fertilizers, and NSERC. And these are big global brands that are making sure that through the developments that we have already, that there will continue to be growth. And that's what the Energy White Paper is going to give us. I think COP26 is a superb opportunity. This government has already consistently signalled that green technology and growth is right at the heart of their agenda. And now that the United States has also signalled decarbonisation is a big part of what they want, China and Japan, we have hundreds of world leaders coming to Glasgow in November. There is no better opportunity for the government to show exactly, with the support of the regions through the industrial clusters and with businesses from all the panelists we've got on the call. We are so ready and so enthusiastic about COP26 that we cannot see a better opportunity to make people aware of what the UK can deliver.
Thank you. Minister, have you got any comments to add on COP26?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was that was extremely exciting. I mean, what I would say is that the point I would make about particular technologies, I think that Steve made, is absolutely right. I mean, there's no when we talk about hydrogen, when we talk about offshore wind, these aren't silver bullets that can answer all the questions or resolve all the difficulties by themselves. I think the mix has to be very broad. We've got to be very flexible. And that's why when people say we need a plan, we need certainty, that's all true. But we can't have, when I hear plan, I hear, 5-year plans, Soviet style. We can't do that because, sitting in 2020, we don't know what the cost of these relative technologies will be. I can't tell you in 2030 what the cost of each of these technologies will be. So we do need a flexibility. I fully understand that there needs to be a clarity of direction in terms of policy, and that I think was supplied to some degree by the 10-point plan. But there is a limit to how much of a plan it is, in the sense of those old Soviet-style 5-year plans where they knew exactly how many nails they would produce in which factory. I mean, that's not what we're about. And lastly, I would say that obviously COP26 is a hugely exciting opportunity for the UK, not only to provide leadership, but to bring people together. What's been very striking, and I don't claim any credit for this, but I find it extraordinary that in the last 15 months, since I've been energy minister, China, Japan, and South Korea have all committed to net zero carbon emissions targets. And I was told when I became minister, it doesn't matter what you do. If the Chinese aren't committed to carbon reduction, or reduction of carbon emissions, what we do is pointless. Well, funnily enough, to it now, that's what they're saying. And I think there's huge global momentum behind this fight against climate change and also decarbonising our economies. So COP26, I think, will represent a huge opportunity for this country.
Thank you very much. And Minister, if I could stay with you for a moment, please. I've got a question about subsidies. So the ultimate objective presumably has to be subsidy-free, low-carbon energy.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask about the steps the government's taking to encourage subsidy-free generation, but also to secure the ability of that to compete with other sources that have benefited from subsidies.
I think that's crucially important. I mean, the case study I would use, which people around the world are following, is how we essentially created the offshore wind industry. 10 years ago, when I was first elected, offshore wind seemed like a pipe dream. It was something very abstract and unreal. And even as late as 2012, we were still generating 40% of our electricity through coal. And all of us are old enough to remember that coal was a huge part of our lives. I mean, from politics to industry to the economy. I mean, coal played a central part. Today, coal is nearly off the grid, something like 2%. And what you call subsidies, I would call incentives. Because we created a market structure. We used carbon pricing, and we also created these auctions, these contracts for difference. That stimulated huge investment in offshore wind to the point at which we are, by far the world leaders in terms of installed capacity. So government does have a role to play. What you call subsidies do have a role to play to encourage private sector investment. But there has to be that competitive process, which the CFD rounds in offshore wind really have reflected, and have been very successful.
Thank you. Richard, perhaps you'd like to comment on that as well.
I completely agree with what Kwasi's saying, really. We also describe it as incentives rather than subsidies. And I think, going back to the world of CCS, if you like, BEIS has made considerable progress over the last 12 months with the development of business models to attract investment for industry, for power, and for transport and storage of carbon dioxide. So, and I think, you reflected at the start, Kwasi, on the 10-point plan, and the only criticism was from the Daily Mail. There was also some comments made around the scale of the investment, particularly compared to Germany, didn't seem the same, but we didn't see it like that at all, because in the world of CCS, we're not after capital investment, we're after the right investment framework.
That's absolutely right.
So,
I could have put it better myself. Sorry, I had to interject. But people just think, well, you're spending this and they're spending, but that's not the point. The point is to create a market incentive.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at offshore wind, 94 billion has been invested in offshore wind since 2010, and that wasn't government money. It was just government creating the framework where people like yourselves, but other people in the private sector could invest. So, thank you very much for saying that. That's
quite all right, but it's that genuinely is what the CCS industry is after. The government have announced they'll spend £1 billion on capital support for CCS projects, which is great. We'll need to think about ways that can be effectively deployed. But the industry is saying that's fantastic, thanks. That will help with the early projects, but we must have the framework in place. So I completely agree with what Kwasi's saying. But if I may, Anita, I'd like to go back briefly to the white paper, because I think one thing that we haven't touched upon that does need to be in there is ambition, and it's interesting, Kwasi, that you mentioned the Soviets, actually, because I'm reading a couple of books at the moment on the space race and actually the moon landings. And I think it's easy for people, of our generation not to realise that when Kennedy announced an ambition for America to go to the moon, they didn't know how to do it. They had the sum total of 15 minutes in space. Russian dogs had spent longer in orbit than American astronauts, yet within the space of less than 10 years they achieved that. I think for me, the real paradox actually with climate change is we know how to fix it, we know what we can do now. So I think the ambition and the drive that drove the space race and the behaviours around that, injecting some of that into our tackling of climate change can mean that we can get into a carbon negative position a lot quicker than anywhere else. So some ambition going forward, some real determination, I think will give us a genuine global leadership position. And again, to sort of to borrow a Kennedy quote from when the Mercury an initial sort of John Glenn era of putting man in space, where we get to with the race for net zero in the UK will determine our position in the globe over the next 50 years. So I think ambition, bold ambition, positioning us at the forefront of decarbonisation will be critical for the UK's place in the world going forward.
Thank you, Richard. That's quite inspirational. And so I suppose this is not intended to be a negative question at all, but we've got with that huge ambition. are there things which the panel think that are potentially there to inhibit the achievement of that ambition and those net zero goals? So, but how can we overcome those hurdles if they are there? So perhaps Helen, could I ask you that one first?
Yeah, sure. I think possibly the largest area for me is, and I think Richard, you kind of touched on it before, is that the technology's there. This isn't for me as much about a technology solution as it is around how do we bring everyone on the journey with us? How do we, particularly looking at the really thorny issue of decarbonising heat, and so much of that depends on consumer choice, and somebody sat in their house and changing their whole heating system. What information do we need to provide them? When do we start engaging them? Because my sense is that awareness among consumers, the general public, around net zero and the targets and on what needs to happen is quite low. Whereas if you talk to industry and large organisations, they're very, very aware of it, and they want to do stuff. And there's lots that we can be cracking on with now, and then looking forward and planning for the future and the changes. And the minister quite rightly talks, the further out you get, the more uncertainty there is. But what I haven't seen in tandem with that yet at the moment is that big kind of tackling that stakeholder engagement challenge, I suppose, and the general public, and bringing them along with us. And I think that's maybe an area that we could really look to focus on, because it could be a massive barrier. And I think if we don't do more in that area, that's the potential to stop us. It doesn't matter what technology we have if people don't deploy in their homes.
Thanks, Helen. And Victoria, would you like to add to that?
Yes, I think Helen's hit the nail on the head, really, because businesses, energy businesses, generation, distribution, we all know what we have to do. We all know what needs to be done. We've been given the opportunity by government, but the end user, the consumer and the investor, these are people that they want net zero. They want to keep the planet healthy. They want green and clean, but explaining to them exactly how we're going to get there and what it's going to cost, and potentially what it could cost to them, is something that will have to be done very carefully and very clearly, because we are all going to have to take a cost in this. Right from the very start with government incentives through to business putting in capital investment from themselves, entrepreneurs putting in their own startup capital. But the end consumer will need to be educated as to there will be a cost at some point. Now, how that's going to come and where it's going to come, I'm sure will become clear over time. But the main thing is that it's a coordinated response. So businesses and government are talking probably more than they've ever spoken before. Government departments, so BEIS, Number 10, Treasury, DEFRA, they're all coordinated, they're all coming forward. And that's where this green industrial strategy is such a strong start. I think we as businesses can be business smart. So people like Bentley they have huge roofs, huge factory roofs. They put solar panels all over them in order to bring down the cost of manufacturing, to keep their energy costs and make them as commercially viable as possible. District heating systems, Mersey heat networks coming forward, and then also local authorities working with business and Powerhouse Energy to bring forward new technologies. I think really it's not so much hurdles to net zero as being as coordinated and as collaborative as possible. We've got to keep talking to each other, because we've made such a strong start that actually if we just keep our eyes open to new opportunities, keep people involved, we will make the best possible endeavours towards net zero.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Now, I have now got a few audience Q&A, and we've got time to deal with a few of those, I think. And I've got a nice big one for us first, which is 2050 fast enough?
It's a very good question. Is that directed to me or just generally to the panel?
Please go ahead, and any of the panel who'd like to comment afterwards, that would be great.
So when you have any target, you've got to measure the achievability with the actual, i.e. your ability to meet the target. with how ambitious the target is. There's always a tension between being ultra ambitious and also actually being plausible. I think 2050 is probably a very, very good time frame because it's achievable. If I said, and as some parties in the last general election were saying that we were going to get to net zero by 2030, that isn't plausible. And actually people can see through that, people who are engaged with the debate. And I think that 2050 strikes the right balance. I mean, the analogy I use is that, if I ask people in the panel to run 100 meters in 10 seconds, that's an unfeasible objective. But actually, if you've got to set a target that's achievable, but that is challenging.
Thank you. Would any of our other panelists like to say anything more about that?
If I can just add to that as well, I think what we've seen, particularly in the areas that we operate in, that some areas of the UK will need to go faster than the 2050 target to actually enable the main target to be hit. And we've seen, great ambitions from our cities and city regions that have set targets around those areas. But that also does bring challenges, and this is where that flexibility that we've talked about comes in. Sure. But I do think that the overall 2050 target will be achieved by some areas actually across the UK going faster and sooner.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with Helen. Actually, it isn't a reason to delay. You're right. If we're capable of doing this in certain parts of the economy, we should be doing it now. And that reflects actually the ambitions that you set out for industrial decarbonisation in the clusters. So why wait? Our own sort of area is, as I said at the top, creating negative emissions with bioenergy and CCS. Certain parts have said, well, we don't need that till 2045 when we need to offset positive residual emissions. Well, actually, we can do that now and make significant inroads whilst also building sort of global leadership positions. Just on the 100 metres analogy, I think with all the training in the world, I'm not making 10 seconds. That's 20 years ago, but not anymore.
Absolutely.
I just add just one thing. I think the achievability is absolutely a part of the target, but also is the affordability. So I do think 2050 gives us time for the engineering and technology evolution we need to actually make those solutions affordable. If we look back a few years at lighting, for example, most people have LED lights in their houses now, in their homes and their offices. They were originally very expensive technologies, but production efficiency, technology advances in manufacture have brought down the price hugely, and they're now cost savers for people. So this affordability dimension is critical, and it's into winning people's hearts and minds. And many of the solutions there that the panel talked about actually save money and reduce the cost of customers. So that's a critical dimension. I do think 2050 does give time for that technology evolution and price.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Now I've got a question which I think is probably most squarely aimed at Richard, but if anybody else would like to comment.
About the space race, is it, Anita?
Sorry?
It's not about the space race.
No, it's not about the space race, it's about CCF. So this is about actually some of the possible risks associated with it. So the question is, what are the liabilities of storing CO2 at sites in the North Sea? For example, leakage from a geological storage site. And over a substantial amount of time, the threat decreases, but what ecological issues could derive from a small leakage over a long period of time?
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. I think, first of all, it's probably sensible to start that whilst this is ambitious for the UK, it is being done elsewhere in the world and has been done for sort of many years, really. So starting with the full chain, if you like, the pipelines, there's thousands of kilometres of carbon dioxide pipelines in operation around the world, particularly in the States. And storing carbon dioxide in deep geological storage sites has been done for many years. So in the North Sea, for example, in Norwegian territorial waters, they've been storing CO2 since 1996, safely. But clearly, you need to be careful. You need to put monitoring in place to make sure that any issues are carefully done. A lot of the solutions depend upon a case-by-case basis. So, we are blessed in the southern North Sea in particular by having some fantastic geology to store carbon dioxide underground. But because we haven't done it in our waters before, we'll have to make sure that injection's done slowly at first, so we can map the dynamic data, the actual behaviour of the CO2 against what we forecast to happen, and then we can sort of start to understand the full potential for storing of CO2. you're right, in over geological time, put broadly, the CO2 can carbonate and form an inert deposit, but in our lifetimes, it will be retained in the rock in a sort of highly critical, well, it's called dense phase actually, and it's under extremely high pressure. So we will be having to roll this out slowly and incrementally. We'll be having extensive monitoring networks in place and make sure that the geology is safe to do so. The analogy that I often use is that we're putting CO2 in deposits that have held materials in the past safely over geological time. So gas, for depleted gas fields, for example, if we're putting carbon dioxide back into them, we can have some confidence that those sites held similar substances to CO2 over millennia without any consequence.
Thank you, Richard. I think we've probably got time for one final question. And this may be, I'm perhaps going to ask Steve first, but if I'm pointing in the wrong direction, please let me know. It's a question about, could you comment please on voltage optimization for EV charging?
Yeah, voltage optimization generally. It's a technique that's used across the world in many modern power grid systems. And for those who are not familiar with it, it's simply regulating the voltage so that appliances work more efficiently. Whether that appliance be an EV charger or your TV or your heating system, whatever that is. So it's one of the technologies that has emerged for the UK as we are, I believe, leading the world in voltage optimization. We've rolled out some projects in the Northwest called Smart Street, which reduces a customer's electricity bill by on average of between £50 and £70 a year. Totally invisible to the customer. It saves carbon, saves the customer money just by modulating the voltage to respond to what customers are doing. So this is an example of the innovation that I think has been stimulated by incentives through the government, both the government and through Ofgem, the industry regulator, and it's absolutely placing British industry at the forefront of this decarbonising technology. It's a superb example of where we are leading the world.
Thank you. Sorry, I thought I was on mute, but I wasn't. Does anybody else want to comment on that particular aspect?
No.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for participating today. We have got about a minute or so left, and I wondered whether I could just perhaps ask the Minister if he had any concluding remarks. Comment. Thank you.
I thought that was really stimulating and exciting, actually, and I was very pleased to be here. I think the one thing that I would stress, actually, that's come out, and a number of people mentioned this, is the fact that this seems actually to the public quite a technical debate, and in order to reach net zero by 2050, we're going to have to bring the public along with us. I mean, this isn't the sort of conversation that we would have or certainly I would have in my constituency in the pub necessarily. But having said that, things like EVs do have cut through. People sort of get it. People get the fact that the internal combustion engine has probably had its day, and that's probably something to do with climate change and the fact that we want to have a cleaner environment. I think a lot of people understand that in an intuitive way, but I think it's right to say that more work needs to be done to bring larger groups of people along with us on this journey.
Thank you very much. I think that brings it all together very nicely, and I'd just like to thank all of our panelists this morning for giving up their time for our debate and discussion, and it's been really interesting, and I hope that all of our audience have enjoyed it as well. So without further ado, I will end the webinar broadcast, and thank you very much again.